It was raining again, and I never liked the rain, not because it was cold, but because it made the city feel heavier, lonelier, like every drop reminded me of the things I was trying to forget. My cheap coat was soaked through, my shoes squished with every step, and the cardboard box I carried over my head to keep the mail dry was starting to fall apart. I hated this part of Brooklyn on nights like this, but it was the only place I could afford. The streetlights flickered, the smell of burnt espresso from the corner cafe lingered in the air, and the world felt too big for someone like me, a single mum, just trying to survive. I didn't move to New York to struggle, but here I was, juggling 2 part-time jobs, raising my little girl, Emily, and pretending I wasn't exhausted every minute of the day. She was the reason I kept going, her smile, her laugh, the way she called me mama, even when she was sleepy. I told myself love was enough, but sometimes love couldn't pay rent or fix a broken heater. That night I was just trying to make it home after another long shift at the diner. My hands smelled of coffee and detergent, my hair clung to my forehead, and I was thinking about the leftover soup waiting for us in the fridge when I saw them. 2 black cars parked across the street, engines running, lights dimmed. Something about them didn't fit. They were too clean, too expensive for this neighborhood. I slowed down, squinting through the rain, and that's when I saw movement. Men in dark coats stepped out, moving quickly, almost too coordinated. They weren't drunk, they weren't lost. They were on a mission. I froze under the awning of the cafe, heart pounding. Then I heard shouting low, urgent Italian words that I couldn't understand but felt dangerous. One of the men stumbled, clutching his side, and another cursed before dragging him toward the car. Then, gunfire. Just one shot, but loud enough to make me flinch. The next second, the cars screeched away, tires splashing water everywhere, and one man was left behind, lying motionless in the middle of the street. For a moment, I couldn't move. The smart thing would have been to turn around and walk away. But when you're a mother, something inside you changes. You see someone hurt, and all you think about is that they could be someone's son. Before I knew it, I was running toward him, my breath fogging in the cold air. He was bleeding, but not gone. I could see his chest rising and falling. His suit was soaked in rain and something darker, and his hand clutched a silver chain like it meant something. I hesitated for a second, then pressed my hand against his wound. Hey, stay with me, I whispered, even though I didn't know if he could hear me. I'm calling for help. I didn't call. I don't even know why. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was because some part of me already knew, whoever this man was, he didn't want the police involved. With trembling hands, I dragged him toward the back door of the cafe where old Mario, the owner, was cleaning up. When he saw me, his eyes went wide. "What are you doing, Ragazza? Are you crazy?" he hissed. But then he saw the man's face and his expression changed. "Madonna," he muttered, making the sign of the cross. "That's trouble you're holding." "I couldn't just leave him there," I said. He grumbled something in Italian and helped me bring the man inside. We laid him on a table in the kitchen, the smell of coffee mixing with the metallic scent of blood. When Mario opened the man's coat to check the wound, I saw a tattoo on his ribs, a serpent coiled around a dagger. Mario's face went pale. "You need to leave," he said firmly. "Now, this is not your fight." I couldn't. "He's dying." "He's not the type who dies easy," Mario said, eyes darting nervously toward the door. "If he lives, they'll come for him. And if they come for him, they'll find you too." Before I could answer, Mario backed away, muttering a prayer, and left me alone with the stranger. His breathing was shallow but steady. I found a clean towel, pressed it against his wound, and tried to ignore how steady his heartbeat felt beneath my fingers. He looked powerful, even unconscious, sharp jaw, strong shoulders, the kind of face that belonged in a different world. I stayed until dawn. When the first light crept through the windows, his eyes opened dark green, sharp and cautious. His voice was low, gravelly, but calm. "Why did you save me?" I swallowed hard. "Because you were dying." Stared at me like he wasn't used to hearing that kind of answer, like kindness was foreign to him. Then he pushed himself up slowly, wincing in pain. "You shouldn't have." "I guess I'm bad at following orders," I said quietly. That almost made him smile. Almost. Then from the front of the cafe, I heard the small, sleepy voice that melted every guard I had. "Mama." Emily peeked around the corner, clutching her worn-out teddy bear. I'd forgotten she'd fallen asleep in the corner booth while I was cleaning up last night. The man's gaze softened as soon as he saw her. "Yours?" he asked. I said, stepping slightly in front of her. He nodded, eyes unreadable. "You're brave, but you shouldn't be here when they come looking." "Who's they?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just looked down at the chain in his hand, the one I'd seen earlier, then back at me. "You should forget you saw me." "I don't even know your name," I I said. He hesitated, then finally said, Luca. That was how I met Luca Romano, the man who would later turn my world upside down. I didn't see him for 3 days after that. Mario said someone came in the night and took him away. No one saw or heard anything. I tried to move on, pretending the encounter was just another strange New York story. Until one evening, I came home from my shift to find a black car parked outside my building. My heart dropped. A man in a suit stood by the car, umbrella in hand. He didn't speak until I was close enough to hear him over the rain. Miss Rivera? Yes, he held out an envelope. Mr. Romano asked me to deliver this. Inside was a note, handwritten, elegant, brief. You saved my life. I owe you one. Don't refuse help when it comes. LR, and under it, a card from a private school, the same one I'd been saving for Emily. Paid in full. I didn't know whether to be grateful or terrified, because something told me that in Luca Romano's world, debts were never simple, and kindness always came with a price. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of tires outside my window, and for a second I thought it was just the garbage truck. But when I looked down from the small crack in the curtain, a black car sat at the curb, the same kind that had delivered Luca's note. My stomach tightened, I told myself. It was coincidence that New York was full of black cars, but deep down I knew better, because since the day I met him, I had felt like invisible eyes were on me wherever I went. At the diner, the same suited man always sat near the door, pretending to read the paper. At the laundromat, someone lingered too long. By the vending machine, it was subtle, never threatening, but constant like a shadow. I wanted to believe it was protection, but protection from what or who? That question stayed with me. As I walked Emily to school, she held my hand, humming her little tune, her pigtails bouncing in rhythm with her steps. And I kept smiling, so she wouldn't see the worry behind my eyes. After I dropped her off, I turned and found him. Leaning against the black car, raincoat, open tie, undone, eyes on me as if he had been waiting all morning. Luca Romano in daylight looked impossibly different, softer, yet still dangerous, the kind of man who could make the air shift without saying a word. I froze halfway across the street, and he smiled faintly, not a friendly smile, but one that said, he already knew every thought in my head. You shouldn't follow me, I said as I crossed the street. He tilted his head. Who said I was following you? I just happened to be. The neighborhood that smells like burnt coffee and broken dreams, I said sarcastically. He chuckled, a low sound that somehow made my heart skip. Maybe I missed the smell of real people, he said. Besides, I promised to keep an eye on you. That wasn't a request. I didn't ask for your protection, Luca. Protection is rarely asked for, it's given when necessary. His tone was calm, but there was steel behind it. I folded my arms. Necessary from what? You wouldn't believe me if I told you, he said, and then added softly, but please don't walk home alone at night anymore. My mind spun between gratitude and anger. Why do you care? I asked. He looked at me for a long time, then said, because you saved me, and because people like me repay debts differently. Before I could reply, his phone rang. He stepped aside, speaking in rapid Italian, his voice low, dangerous. And for a moment I saw the side of him that belonged to the shadows. When he hung up, he said, I have to go, but we'll talk soon. And when he said soon, it didn't sound like a suggestion. It sounded like a promise. Days passed, and I tried to keep life normal, but things around me began to shift. My landlord, who had ignored my maintenance calls for months, suddenly replaced our broken heater. The diner manager, who had threatened to cut my hours, now smiled and gave me extra shifts. It was like invisible hands were fixing my world. And though part of me was grateful, the other part was terrified. One evening, as I left work, a man stepped out of the alley, blocking my path. He smelled of whiskey and trouble. He grabbed my wrist and sneered, hey, pretty thing, been seeing you walk by here every night, thought maybe you could keep me company. I froze, fear prickling through me. I tried to pull back, but his grip tightened until a hand appeared out of nowhere, twisting the man's arm until he groaned and fell to his knees. Luca stood over him, silent, cold eyes burning. If you ever touch her again, he said in Italian accented English, you won't have hands to use. The man stumbled away, muttering curses. Luca turned to me, breathing hard. Are you hurt? I shook my head. He was too close, his suit crisp, his scent of rain and smoke filling the air. You shouldn't have followed me. I whispered, you shouldn't walk alone. He replied, it's like we're both bad at listening. He almost smiled, but his jaw tightened again. His gaze dropped to my wrist, where the man had grabbed me, and he reached out his thumb, brushing lightly over the red mark. I flinched at the warmth of his touch. Something electric shot through me, and for a moment the city noise faded around us. You can't keep doing this, I said softly. People will notice. I want them to notice, he said sharply. Maybe. Then they'll stop thinking they can come near you. His possessiveness, both scared and comforted me, Luca. This isn't your world, it is now, he said simply. And that was the first time I realized there was no escaping him later. That night, I found another envelope under my door, no name. Just a single red rose, pressed against the paper. Inside a photograph of me, and Emily walking to school taken from. Far and beneath it, a note written in the same handwriting as before someone else is watching you. My heart dropped. I didn't sleep that night. I kept checking the windows, holding Emily close. By morning, I decided to find Luca before whoever else did at noon. I stood outside a restaurant in Little Italy, the kind with dark windows and guards, who didn't smile. When they saw me, they told me to leave, until Luca himself appeared behind them. Let her. And he said his tone made them step aside. Inside smelled of wine. In danger, his men sat at tables speaking quietly, and every eye turned to me. Luca led me to a private room. What are you doing here? He asked. I held up the photo. Someone's watching me, if that's your idea of a joke. It's not funny. His face darkened. As he took the picture, he cursed softly in Italian. And when he looked up again, the charm was gone, replaced by fury. I told you to stay home. He said it's not safe anymore. Safe from who? I asked. From everyone. He snapped, then caught himself running a hand through his hair. He sighed softly. You shouldn't have been dragged into this. But now you are, and I can't let anything happen to you. I didn't ask for protection, I said, trembling. He stepped closer, until I could feel his breath. Maybe not. But you have it whether you like it or not. I looked up at him. His eyes softer. Now you can't control everything, Luca. Maybe not, he said. But I can control what's mine. And the way he said mine made my heart stumble. For a second, everything stopped. The room, the sound, the fear, all I could here was the echo of that word, mine. I wanted to tell him I wasn't his, but the truth stuck in my throat. Because part of me wanted to believe that being his meant being safe, being seen, being something more than invisible. He stepped back, finally clearing his throat. I'll find out who took this picture, he said quietly. Until then you'll stay somewhere safer. I have an apartment uptown. Absolutely not, I said. You think I'll let you argue about this? He cut in, eyes narrowing, the air between us thick with unspoken feelings. That's where the danger starts, he added, lower than a whisper. The people who want to hurt me will use you to do it. I felt cold, suddenly realizing how deep this world went. Luca, what are you mixed up in? I asked. The wrong family. He said, the kind that doesn't forgive. I didn't understand then. But I would soon enough, because that night when we drove to his apartment, lights from passing cars flashing across his face, I saw for the first time the man the city whispered about, the Mafia boss who ruled with silence and a single look. And still the man who turned his head when Emily laughed from the back seat, like he couldn't remember the last time he'd heard something pure. When we reached the building, it towered above the city, glass and marble shining even through the night rain, the kind of place that had security guards and quiet hallways and rugs that swallowed the sound of your steps. Luca parked the car himself. The man who usually did it disappeared the moment he arrived. I followed him inside, still holding Emily's small hand. She looked around, wide-eyed. Mama, are we in a castle? She whispered. Luca smiled, softly, something rare and almost boyish, only for a second. Yes, Principessa. Something like that. His voice melted the cold edges around me, and I hated that it did. The elevator ride was silent. I watched the numbers climb too fast, my heart racing with them. When the doors opened to a floor that seemed to belong only to him, I felt my breath catch. The apartment was all white walls and dark wood, everything neat, precise, almost empty. It felt like a place where no one stayed long. He gestured toward a couch. Sit, you both look tired. I hesitated. What are you planning to do with us? Protect you, he said simply, as if that word fixed everything. I don't need protection, Luca. I just need to keep my daughter safe. That's what I'm doing, he said quietly, his eyes softening for a moment before he turned away, taking off his jacket, revealing the bandage still faintly visible beneath his shirt. You shouldn't even be moving, I said. He looked back, amused. You worry too much. I worry enough for two people, I shot back. He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. There's food in the kitchen, bedrooms down the hall. You and Emily can stay there. I'll have someone bring your things. My things? How do you even know where I live? He didn't answer, just said, trust me. Those words felt heavier than anything else that night. I tried to protest again, but he was already walking toward the balcony, phone in hand, speaking in low Italian tones. I sat with Emily until she fell asleep, her head on my lap, her breathing soft, steady. I watched Luca through the glass doors, talking under the silver light, city lights, flickering behind him, every move controlled. Every line of his body tense, like a man who'd forgot how to rest. When he finally came inside, his shirt sleeves rolled, his tie gone. He looked at me and said quietly, you shouldn't be afraid of me. I wanted to laugh. Afraid isn't the right word then. What is? He asked, stepping closer. until only the couch separated us. I don't know, I whispered, maybe it's that you make everything feel too real. He smiled slightly. You should sleep, I'll keep watch. I wanted to ask from what again, but something in his eyes stopped me. Just nodded and carried Emily to the guest room. The sheets smelled faintly of cedar, and something warm, the kind of scent that made me think of old stories about knights and promises. When I came back out, he was still standing by the window, the skyline reflected in his eyes. I should thank you, I said, for letting us stay here. He shook his head. No, you shouldn't thank me because now you're in my world and my world doesn't give without taking something in return. I wanted to ask what he meant, but exhaustion pulled at me, and before I knew it, sleep dragged me under. The next morning, sunlight filtered through curtains. I woke to the smell of coffee. Luca was already dressed, crisp suit, clean bandages, his back to me. As he poured 2 cups, you sleep like someone who hasn't in a long time, he said. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. Maybe I didn't feel safe for a while. He handed me a cup and said quietly, then get used to it for a few days. But don't open the door for anyone. He checked his watch. I have to handle something, I'll leave. Guard outside. When he walked to the door, I said, Luca, wait. He turned, his expression unreadable. Be careful. He paused, gave a small nod, and left. Silence filled the apartment. Hours passed. I cleaned, helped Emily with her drawing, tried to pretend life was normal, until a knock echoed through the door. My heart leapt. I remembered his warning. I didn't answer. Then a voice came, soft, female accented. Is Luca home? Its urgent curiosity pushed me. I opened the door just a little, enough to see her tall, elegant red coat, eyes sharp as glass. Oh, she said, smiling slightly, so you're the reason he hasn't called back. My stomach twisted. Excuse me, who are you? She laughed, a low sound. You must be new. I'm Valentina and Luca. And I go way back. Her gaze slipped past me to the living room, to Emily's toys on the floor. She raised an eyebrow. Looks like he's keeping secrets again. The air thickened. I didn't know what to say. She stepped closer, too close. Tell him I stopped by, she said, her smile turning colder as she turned and walked away. Shut the door fast, my hands shaking. When Luca returned that night, I didn't wait. I stood by the window and said, who is Valentina? His jaw tightened. Why, she was here. She said, you two go way back. His silence was the loudest answer. My chest hurt more than it should. She's from before. He said, finally. Before what? Before I died. He added bitterly, what does that even mean? He sighed, dragging a hand through his hair. It means there are people who think they own me. She's one of them. And you, she asked about you because she knows she can't control me anymore. I crossed my arms. Maybe she still can. His eyes flashed sharp jealousy, anger, protectiveness. You think I'd ever choose her over you? We barely know each other, I said. He stepped closer, eyes burning. Maybe that's why it scares me, because I can't stop thinking about you, he said quietly. My pulse jumped. Luca, stop, please. I can't do this. Your world, it's too dangerous. He cupped my face, gently, his thumb brushing my cheek, and whispered, I know, but you're already part of it now, whether you want it or not. A knock interrupted us, sharp, rapid, his men's voices murmuring outside. He cursed under his breath. Stay here, he said, and walked out, gunmetal glinting at his waist. I grabbed Emily and held her tight. Footsteps, voices shouting in Italian. Then silence. Seconds later, Luca came back, his face pale. Someone tried to get in, he said softly through the service entrance. The fear in his tone was something I'd never heard before. Not for himself, but for us. He pulled me close, his voice shaking just enough for me to hear. You and Emily are mine to protect, and I swear no one touches what's mine ever again. He pulled me close, his arm a cage of warmth and steel, his breath against my temple, and for a heartbeat the world outside the apartment vanished. But the sound of my own pulse reminded me of how close danger was. Luca, let go, I whispered, because my daughter was between us, pressed against my chest, her small hands clinging to my shirt. He eased his hold, but his eyes never left mine. You have to trust me, he said, voice low, dark. I don't have anyone else, I said, barely audible. Then you have me, he answered without hesitation. I wanted to tell him that wasn't enough, that his world could crush mine. But the way he said it made something in me break and soften at the same time. His men outside muttered in Italian, orders being passed, security tightened. I could hear the shuffle of feet in the hall. I asked, what's happening? He looked toward the window. Rivals, he said quietly. They found where I live. It's not safe here anymore. Then why bring us here? Because until tonight this was the only place I believed. No one could reach. His jaw clenched, and I saw something raw flicker behind his eyes. Fear not for himself, but for us. We need to move, he said quickly. My heart jumped. Where? To somewhere they won't look. He grabbed his phone, called someone, speaking fast in Italian, his tone cutting sharp. When he ended the call, he turned back to me. You and Emily get what you need. We're leaving in 5 minutes. I nodded, grabbed our small bag, the one I always kept ready from too many moves, too many escapes. Emily looked up, sleepy-eyed. Mama, where are we going? "Somewhere safe, baby," I said, and tried to smile, but my hands trembled. Luca noticed. He stepped closer, his fingers brushing mine. "Steadying me, I'll handle this," he murmured. "I promise." I stared at him, trying to understand why he cared so much. Jealousy from Valentina's visit burned low in my chest. Maybe she was right, maybe I was just another secret. But then he looked at Emily, and there was nothing false in his gaze, only fierce protectiveness. We went down a private stairwell, dimly lit. Two of his men. Ahead, two behind, guns hidden. But I felt their presence like shadows. Luca's hand stayed at the small of my back, guiding me out to an underground garage, a black SUV waiting, rain still falling outside. We got in. Emily pressed to my side. Luca slid in next to us, the driver pulling away as the garage door shut behind. "What about your apartment?" I asked. "Gone," he said, like it meant nothing. "My life is not made of walls. It's made of people who stay or leave. And right now you're the only ones I can't let go of." The car sped through empty streets. I watched the city lights blur, wondering how I'd ended up here, a single mother from New York, sitting next to a man who ruled a world I barely understood. Danger wrapped around him like a second skin, yet when he glanced at me, I saw something softer breaking through the armor. "Tell me about you," he said, suddenly, his voice almost gentle. I blinked. "What, you want to know anything?" "Everything," he said, eyes fixed on mine. I hesitated, then started talking about how I came. New York, how hard it had been, how I worked 2 jobs, how Emily was all I had left of a life. I'd lost his hand, tightened on the seat between us, his jaw set. But his eyes were warm. "You're stronger than you think," he murmured. "No, I'm just surviving," I said. He reached over and brushed a tear from my cheek. Without thinking, "Don't cry, Piccola, you're safe now." I wanted to believe him, but safety felt like a dream. The car turned off the main road into a gated driveway, hidden by trees, an old stone house rising at the end, lights glowing faintly like something out of another century. When the car stopped, Luca got out first, scanning the area before opening my door. His hand extended. I took it and stepped out, rain soaking my hair. He led us inside. The house was warm wood and old tapestries, a fire burning in a huge hearth. His men spread out, checking rooms. When they were done, he shut the door, locked it, turned to me, and said, "We're alone now." For the first time that night, I exhaled, tension slipping a little. Emily ran to the fire, curling up with her toy. Luca watched her, then me, his expression unreadable. "You're angry," he said softly. I shook my head, just scared and confused. He stepped closer, jealousy flickering in his eyes. "About Valentina?" he asked. I didn't answer. He smiled, faintly, bitterly. "She doesn't matter." "Not the way you think, then." "Why did she look at me like that?" "Because she's used to getting what she wants, and she knows I've stopped wanting her." My chest tightened. "Why me, then?" He stared at me long enough that the room seemed to shrink. "Because you're real," he said at last. "Because you don't see me as a boss or a monster. You look at me like I'm still a man." My breath caught. I'm trying not to. He moved closer, until we were inches apart, his hand lifting, but stopping just before my cheek. He whispered. I nodded without meaning to. His fingers traced my jaw lightly, warmth spreading through me, his eyes dark, with something between desire and promise. "I don't know how to do this," I said softly. "I've been alone a long time." "Then let me show you how," he murmured. "Not as a boss, not as a savior, but as a man who can't stop thinking about you." Before I could answer, a phone rang sharp, cutting the moment. He cursed, stepped back, answered, listened, his face turning to stone. "They're here," he said to his men. At once the house filled with motion, orders shouted, doors locked. Luca grabbed my hand, pulled me toward a hidden stairway behind a bookshelf. "Stay down here," he said. "No," I whispered, "I'm not leaving you." He turned, eyes blazing with protectiveness and something deeper. "You and Emily are my only weakness, and I will not lose you. Stay here." "That's an order." He pushed me gently into the hidden room, shut the door. Footsteps and voices above, then silence. Emily clung to me, whispering, "Mama, I'm scared." I held her tight, trying to steady my breath, every sound from above making my heart jump. I pressed my ear to the door, heard shouting, a crash. Then Luca's voice, cold, deadly, promising someone they'd regret coming here. Then gunfire, silence again. I clutched Emily tighter, tears slipping down my face. Until at last the door opened. Luca stood there, breathing hard, a cut on his cheek, but alive, his eyes searching mine, then softening when he saw us. "It's over for now," he said, and reached for us. I went into his arms, trembling. He held me like he'd never let go, whispering into my hair, "I told you no one touches what's mine." His arms were still around me, strong, steady, like the world outside didn't exist anymore. I could hear his heartbeat against my ear, fast, but controlled, the kind of rhythm that felt like safety and warning at once. "Luca," I whispered. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head. "Just a scratch." "You're shaking," he murmured. I couldn't stop it. Adrenaline, fear, relief, all tangled together. He brushed his thumb along my jaw, slow, tender, his eyes searching mine. I told you I'd keep you safe, I know, I said, voice trembling. You shouldn't have to. Fight for us, he smiled faintly. That's all I know how to do, fight for what matters. My chest ached at his words. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen, protected. But that feeling scared me, because I knew what men like him carried behind their strength. Luca looked toward the stairs, making sure his men were clearing the house, then turned back to me. It's done, they won't come again, he said. Eyes stared at the cut on his cheek, and before thinking reached up to wipe the blood his breath caught slightly when my fingers touched him, his skin warm, rough against mine. You shouldn't look at me like that, he whispered. Why? Because it makes me forget who I'm supposed to be, and I can't afford that. Not now. I swallowed. What are you supposed to be? He exhaled something like a laugh. A leader, a monster, depending on who you ask. Maybe both. To me, you're just Luca, the man who saved us. He closed his eyes briefly, as if those words hurt more than anything else. I wish you didn't see it that way, because if you keep seeing me as savior, you'll never forgive me. When I fail, you won't, I said softly. He opened his eyes again, their color darker than before. Don't make promises like that, I wanted to answer. But Emily stirred beside me, whispering, Mama, is it morning soon, baby? I said, smiling faintly. Luca knelt beside her, his voice gentler than I'd ever heard. You're safe, Principessa. She smiled sleepily and mumbled, thank you. He froze for a moment, as if no one had ever thanked him like that before. When she drifted back to sleep, he stood and turned away quickly, his shoulders tense. You should rest, both of you. I'll keep watch. Again, you need sleep too, I said. He shook his head. I don't sleep easily anymore. I watched him walk to the window, the glow from the fire painting gold across his face. I thought about Valentina, about his enemies, about the walls he'd built around his heart. And yet somehow he'd let us in, maybe against his own. Well, I went to the small kitchen, found a first aid kit, brought it to him. Sit down, I said gently. He looked surprised, but bade. I cleaned the cut carefully, my hands steadying around his jaw. He watched me silently, every brush of my fingers sparking something unspoken between us. When I finished, he caught my wrist, not hard, but firm. Thank you, he said quietly. You don't have to keep thanking me, Luca. You keep risking everything for us. He let go slowly, his gaze still on me, then said, you remind me of sunlight. I laughed softly. We're surrounded by storm, and you call me sunlight. Maybe that's why I can't look away. His tone was low, rough-edged, the kind that sent warmth through me. I turned before he could see the blush creeping up my neck. The room felt too small, too charged. I busied myself fixing tea, but my hands trembled again. I could feel his gaze on my back. When I handed him the cup, he took it, his fingers brushing mine, deliberately slow, maybe on purpose, maybe not. I couldn't tell. Outside, thunder rolled, and he said quietly, they'll try again, won't they? Yes, but not tonight. Tonight they'll lick their wounds, and I'll make sure they don't rise again. What will you do? Whatever it takes, he said, simple, final. I believed him. That scared me even more. I wanted to reach for him, to tell him that he didn't have to carry everything alone. But the words stuck, the fire crackled, the only sound between us. Then suddenly his phone buzzed. He looked at it, frowned, answered a few curt words in Italian, then hung up. Trouble? I asked. Not yet, he said, but it's coming. We might need to leave the city. While we're somewhere quieter, he looked at me, then to Emily sleeping on the couch, somewhere she can laugh without fear, maybe. Italy, the word hung between us like a spark. Italy, I repeated. He nodded. I have a villa there, isolated, safe. You'd like it? I'm not sure what to say. He smiled faintly. You don't have to decide now, but soon, because when they come again, I'm not risking New York. I bit my lip. The thought of leaving everything terrified me, but the way he said safe made me want to believe him. We'll see, I whispered. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing. A challenge. I always get what I want, Mia Cara. The way he said those words, low, full of heat, made me shiver. Stop calling me that, I said, smiling despite myself. Why? Because you like it too much, he teased. And I had no answer. Lightning flashed through the window. His expression turned serious again. You should sleep, truly sleep. I'll be here when you wake up. I didn't argue. I lay down near Emily. Luca sat nearby, silent, watchful, the sound of rain and fire blending together. I drifted off at last, and for the first time my dreams weren't full of fear. When I woke the next morning, he was gone. The house quiet, a note on the table written in neat handwriting. Went to settle things, stay inside, trust me, always. I held the paper close, the scent of his cologne faint against it. Hours later, a car stopped outside. I froze, looked through the window, expecting his men, but instead saw Valentina stepping out again, this time with two others. My heart pounded. I opened the door just a crack. She smiled coldly. He didn't tell you, did he? Tell me what? She stepped forward, voice dripping with mock sympathy. That he's leaving New York for good, and he's not taking you with him. I blinked. No, that's not true. She laughed. Then we'll see, won't we? The tail lights of another car glowed down the drive, Luca's black SUV returning. I saw his figure through the rain-tall certain Valentina, turned smirking, "Watch yourself, little mother, you don't know the games men like him play." She walked past him, pausing just long enough to whisper something I couldn't hear before disappearing into her car. Luca's eyes found mine, instantly sharp, searching. He walked straight toward me, rain dripping from his hair. "What did she say?" I asked. He shook his head. "Nothing that matters." "I don't believe you," he sighed, stepped closer, too close, the air crackling with jealousy. "And hurt you think I'd let anyone come between us?" he asked, voice quiet, but dangerous. "I don't know, Luca. She said you have secrets, everyone does, but you're the one I'm trying to protect." His tone softened. "Again, she doesn't matter." Mia loose, his fingers brushed my chin, and for a moment the anger melted, replaced by something deeper, something that felt a lot like falling. Luca's fingers still rested beneath my chin, his eyes locked on mine, and the world seemed to narrow, until it was only the two of us breathing the same air. I could feel the pulse in his wrist, steady, powerful, a quiet storm under control. I wanted to say something, but words slipped away. He whispered, "You don't have to doubt me, Mia loose. I hate doubt. It makes me do things I regret." My voice came out small like what he smiled, without warmth. "You don't want to know that I believed him," because his eyes told stories of battles won and hearts lost. I stepped back, needing space, air sense. But he followed, not touching, yet close enough that I could feel the gravity of him. "You shouldn't look at me like that," I said softly. "And you shouldn't make me," he answered lower. The room felt charged, alive, with something neither of us understood. "Luca," I breathed, "you said we were safe here." He nodded. "For now. But safety is never forever. Not in my world. I don't belong in your world." He tilted his head. "Maybe not, but my world already decided you belong to it." The words hit harder than I expected. Belong to it, not to him. But I heard the echo anyway, the possessiveness hiding in his tone. My heart tripped. He must have seen it, because he exhaled long and quiet. "I didn't mean it like that." "Then how did you mean it?" I asked. "That I can't protect anything I don't hold close," he said finally. "And I choose to hold you close." Silence stretched between us, heavy, fragile. Then Emily's laughter drifted from the next room, breaking the spell. Luca smiled, faintly, like sunlight cracking through storm clouds. "She's brave like her mother," he murmured. I smiled, "Despite everything. Maybe she just doesn't know enough to be scared. Maybe she learned from you to stand when everything tries to push her down." "Maybe," I said, "maybe she learned that from the man who saved us." He looked at me for a long time, then turned away, almost shy, which felt strange on him. "Come," he said, "I want to show you something." He led us through the hallway to a small garden behind the house, ivy climbing, stone fountains trickling quietly. The air smelled of rain and rosemary. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "This was my mother's garden," he said softly. "She loved peace. She never got much of it, but she tried to grow it here." I looked at him differently, then not just as the Mafia boss everyone whispered about, but as a man shaped by loss. "I'm sorry," I said. He shrugged softly. "I stopped visiting this place after she died tonight. Felt like the right time to remember her." I reached for his hand. Without thinking, he let me take it, his fingers curling around mine. "Gently. Thank you for showing me," he said. Nothing, just looked at our joined hands like he couldn't decide if it was real or dream. Then his phone buzzed again, his jaw tightened. He stepped aside, answered short, clipped words in Italian. When he hung up, his expression changed. "We have to go." "What happened?" I asked. "Another threat. The men who came last night. They were hired by someone bigger, someone from Naples. They want leverage. And they think you are." At my stomach dropped. "Leverage, Luca? Who are these people?" "Old ghosts," he said grimly. "Ghosts that do like when I build something new." We packed fast, Luca, all sharp focus now, giving orders in low tones. Emily, half asleep, clung to her blanket, asking, "Where are we going?" I crouched down, kissed her forehead. "Somewhere safe, baby, promise." Luca's hand brushed my shoulder softly. "I'll make sure of it." The drive was long, through winding roads, rain streaking the windows. Luca didn't speak much, his eyes on the rearview mirror scanning shadows. I watched him silently, trying to imagine what his life had been before the violence, before the fear. We stopped near a private airstrip, a small jet waiting. I stared at it, disbelief rising. "You own that?" He half smiled. "Eye on the sky when I need to." We boarded, Emily fascinated by the seats. Luca helped me fasten her belt, then sat across from us, engines roaring. He leaned back, eyes closing for the first time in days. He looked tired, not dangerous, just human. When the plane lifted above the clouds, he opened his eyes again and said, "Italy is not like New York, quieter. In some ways, more dangerous in others. Will we be safe there? Safer than here," he promised. I wanted to believe him. I looked at the clouds outside, endless white, stretching forever. Somewhere beyond them was a home I hadn't chosen, but maybe needed. When we landed, the world smelled different, warm and old, and full of stories. The villa stood on a hill surrounded by olive trees, and silence Luca's men, scattered, securing the area. He took a deep breath, almost like he could breathe again for the first time. "Welcome home," he said. I blinked. "Home," he nodded. "For now. Until I fix everything." The days that followed felt almost unreal. Emily played in the gardens, laughing, chasing butterflies. Luca worked from the study, phone calls, meetings, visits from men who bowed slightly. When they saw him, sometimes I'd catch him watching me from across the courtyard, eyes soft, unguarded. At night, we'd sit near the fountain, the sound of water blending with crickets. Sometimes we'd talk, sometimes silence was enough. One evening he told me about his father, about loyalty and betrayal, about promises made in blood and broken in greed. I listened quietly, realizing that behind his danger there was deep loneliness. When he finally looked at me, he said, "You make this place feel alive again." I didn't know what to answer, so I said the only thing that came to mind, "Maybe that's what sunlight does." He laughed softly, "That sound, rare, precious." Then his phone buzzed again, and everything changed. His face went cold. He stood, walked away, voice low, sharp. When he returned, his eyes were dark. "Something's wrong." I knew instantly what he didn't want to say. "What is it?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "They took one of my men, the one who guarded your door in New York. They want me to trade." I froze. "Trade what?" He looked at me, and my heart knew the answer before he said it. They want you." I stared, disbelief, shock, fear flooding me. "What will you do?" Luca's voice was quiet, deadly. "Whatever it takes to make sure they never touch you again. You can't go after them alone," I said. He smiled faintly. "Too late for that. They already called the meeting tomorrow night." My breath hitched. I grabbed his hand. "Please don't." He squeezed my fingers, eyes soft but unyielding. "I have to," he said, "because they think they can use you to control me. They're wrong. But I have to prove it." "What if something happens to you?" "Nothing will happen, I promise." His thumb brushed the back of my hand, his voice low and rough. "You're the first thing that's made me believe in more than survival. I won't lose." That he leaned forward, forehead resting against mine. For a heartbeat, everything stilled. I could feel his breath, the weight of everything unsaid. When he pulled back, he whispered, "If I don't come back, stay here, take Emily, and go somewhere new, start over. Don't wait for me." I shook my head. "No, I can't." He smiled. "Then you really are my weakness, aren't you?" The night before he left hung heavy like the air before a storm. I could feel it even in the silence. The villa was too still. Luca moved through the rooms, checking doors, speaking quietly to his men. I followed him, unable to sleep, my heart pulling in two directions, fear and faith. He turned. When he heard my steps, "You should be in bed," he said softly. I shook my head. "I can't sleep, not when you're walking into danger." He smiled, a tired smile. "I've walked into worse. You've never had someone waiting for you before," I said, and it made him stop for a heartbeat. He came closer, brushed his knuckles against my cheek. "No," he whispered, "I haven't." We stood there, the air thick with everything we wanted to say. "But didn't," he finally said, "I have to meet them alone. If I take men, they'll think I'm hiding behind power. If I go alone, they'll listen more. You can't trust them." I said, "You don't know them." He nodded. "You're right. But I know what they fear. They fear losing control. And that's something I can take from them." I reached for his hand, fingers trembling. He took it, held it against his chest, where I could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong. "Promise me you'll come back," I whispered. He looked down at me, his eyes warm, fierce. "I promise. And when Luca Valentino makes a promise, he keeps it." His voice was low, almost a vow. I wanted to believe it. I needed to. He leaned closer, pressed a kiss to my forehead, lingering there a second longer than necessary, then turned and walked away into the shadows of the hallway. I stood there long after the sound of his footsteps faded, trying to breathe. Morning came, gray and cold. I waited by the window, every sound outside making my heart jump. Emily played quietly in the corner, humming to herself. The clock ticked, slow, merciless. Hours passed, until finally the sound of engines came up the drive. My breath caught. I ran to the door. It opened, and there he was, alive, but pale, his jacket torn, his eyes dark with exhaustion. Relief crashed through me. I ran to him without thinking. He caught me mid-step, his arms closing around me tight. "I told you I'd come back," he murmured. I nodded against his chest, tears spilling before I could stop them. "You kept your promise," I said. He pulled back just enough to look at me. "Always," he whispered. But something in his eyes told me it wasn't over. "Not yet." "What happened?" I asked. He shook his head. "Later, not now, right now. I just want to see you smile." I tried, but worry tugged at the corners of it. "Luca, tell me," he sighed, brushed a strand of hair from my face. "They agreed to leave us alone for now, but it cost me something." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely there. He looked away into the distance. "I had to give up a part of my territory, part of the empire my father built. And you'd do that for us, for me?" He met my gaze, steady yes, without hesitation. I felt the world tilt around me. No one had ever chosen me over power, over pride. You didn't have to do that. I whispered I wanted to, he said. Because maybe this is what freedom looks like, giving up the things that don't matter for the ones that do. I couldn't speak the lump. My throat too thick. He smiled faintly, then leaned down, kissed my forehead again, softer this time, the storm in his eyes finally quiet for a moment. Emily ran to him, arms outstretched. Luca lifted her, easily spinning her once in the air, her laughter filling the villa. It felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. I watched them together, and for the first time believed maybe there could be peace. He set her down, turned to me, his voice low. I need to rest a few hours. Then we'll talk about what comes next. Go, I said. I'll stay with Emily. He nodded, started to walk away, then stopped, and looked back. Thank you for believing in me, he said. I didn't answer, because my heart was too full. The next few days passed quietly. Luca recovering slowly, his men relaxed a little. But the undercurrent of tension never truly left. Sometimes at night, I'd find him on the balcony, staring at the horizon, lost in thought. One night, I joined him, the sky above us scattered with stars. You should be asleep, he said, without looking at me. You should be too, I replied. He smiled faintly. I don't sleep much. You dream when you sleep, I asked. Sometimes, he said softly, mostly of things I can't change. Like what? Like faces of people I couldn't save. Silence fell heavy. Then he turned toward me and asked, do you ever regret trusting me? I thought about it, about the fear, the chaos, the danger. And then about the way he looked at Emily, the way he said my name like it meant home. No, I said finally, because you've never lied to me, not about the things that matter. His eyes softened. That means more than you think. I wasn't sure what to say, so I just leaned against the railing, the night air cool around us. He reached out, brushed his fingers against mine, the smallest touch. But it felt like a promise. I don't know what happens next, I said quietly. Neither do I, he admitted. But I know one thing, you and Emily, you're my reason now. And I don't let go of my reasons. His voice was rough with emotion. He looked away quickly, as if afraid I'd see too much. I didn't speak, just let the silence hold us both. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of olive trees and sea salt. I realized then that even in his world full of danger and shadows, there could still be moments like this, small, fragile pieces of peace, and maybe that was enough for now. Italy looked nothing like the New York I knew. The sun here felt different, softer, warmer, like it wanted to heal what the city had broken. Luca's villa sat on a hill, overlooking the sea. Olive trees lined the path, and the air smelled of salt and wildflowers. I stood on the balcony, the wind tugging at my hair. Emily laughed somewhere below, chasing butterflies. Her laughter echoed against the stone walls. It felt unreal, like I'd stepped into someone else's dream. Luca came up behind me, silent as always, his hands sliding around my waist. I leaned back against him, the solid weight of him grounding me. Do you like it here? He asked, his breath warm against my ear. It's beautiful, I said, but it doesn't feel real yet. Give it time, he murmured. Everything real starts slow. I smiled a little, turning in his arms. His eyes were softer than I'd ever seen them. No shadows, no anger, just quiet peace for once. I whispered. He brushed his thumb across my cheek and said, I brought you here to start over. No debts, no ghosts, no danger. And you think ghosts listen to geography? I teased. He chuckled low in his throat. Maybe not, but they can't chase what they can't find. I wanted to believe him, I really did. But somewhere deep down, a part of me knew the past never truly let go. That night, after Emily went to bed, we sat on the terrace, the world below us bathed in silver moonlight. Luca poured wine and said softly, I used to come here with my mother when I was a boy, before everything changed. She said the sea keeps secrets, it listens, but never tells. I looked at him, the way the moonlight carved his profile, sharp and tender all at once. What do you think it's hearing now? I asked. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, maybe it hears a man who thought he'd never find peace, and a woman brave enough to believe he could. My heart twisted. He always said things that made me forget to breathe. The days slipped into weeks. We built routines, quiet ones, breakfasts on the patio, walks through the vineyards, Emily painting in the garden, Luca working from his study. But sometimes I caught him watching the road, the tension in his jaw returning like an old scar. One evening I asked him, you're waiting for something, aren't you, or someone? He didn't answer right away, then said softly, trouble doesn't need an invitation. I frowned. I thought you said we were safe. We are, he said. But even safe places can be tested. It's how you learn if they're worth protecting. I didn't sleep much that night. The wind outside carried the sound of the sea, but also something else, something restless. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was just nerves, until the black car appeared at the bottom of the drive. Luca saw it too from the balcony. His face went cold. He turned to me. Stay inside, don't come out until I say so. I grabbed his arm. Luca, who is it? Old friends, he said flatly. But his eyes told me the truth. Enemies. I watched from the window as three men stepped out of the car. They spoke in Italian, their voices low, but sharp. Luca's body tensed, the air between them thick enough to choke on one of them. Gestured toward the villa, shouting something. Luca's reply was calm, but final. Whatever he said made the man's expression twist in fury. Luca didn't flinch, not even when the man shoved him hard. My hand flew to my mouth. But before I could move, Luca's men appeared from nowhere, silent shadows. The strangers hesitated, realizing they weren't alone. Words turned into warnings. And then finally silence. The car left, kicking dust into the air. Luca stood there for a long time before coming back inside. I met him at the door. What was that about? I demanded. His voice was quiet, but heavy. Protection, money, old debts. They thought maybe I'd forgotten. He poured himself a drink, his hands steady, but his eyes stormy. Did you? I asked. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, I forget nothing, but I forgive some, and this time I chose forgiveness. I stepped closer, brushing my fingers over his knuckles. You did the right thing. He smiled faintly. We'll see by the next morning. The tension seemed to ease. He joined Emily for breakfast, reading her a story in broken English. She corrected his words, giggling every time he got them wrong. And for a moment it felt normal, simple. I watched them together and thought maybe this was what happiness looked like, fragile, but real. Later that day I found Luca in his study papers, spread out maps, contracts, names. He looked up when I entered, his expression softening. You should be in the garden, he said. I came to see you, I replied. He leaned back in his chair, reaching for my hand, pulling me closer. You worry too much. I have reason to, I said softly. He smiled, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. Maybe, but worry doesn't suit you. I laughed quietly and said, neither does peace. He raised a brow. Oh, really? I nodded. You look restless when it's too quiet. Maybe I am. He admitted, I've spent my life in noise. Silence feels like waiting for something to break. Then don't wait, I said. Live it. He stared at me for a long time and whispered, maybe you're the only thing that makes me want to. The days grew longer and warmer, but something in Luca began to shift. I could see it in the way he lingered by the phone, waiting for calls that never came, and in the quiet moments when he thought I wasn't watching. His smile would fade, replaced by that same faraway look I'd seen the night of the car. He said nothing, but I could feel the tension tightening like invisible threads around our little world. One evening, after putting Emily to bed, I found him outside, standing by the gate, cigarette in hand, the sea wind tossing his hair. I didn't know you smoked, I said softly. I don't, he murmured, then flicked it away. Half-burned habit from another life. I walked closer until our shoulders almost touched. What are you thinking about? Ghosts, he said simply. Ghosts with names and debts. I took a breath. Luca, you promised me this was over. He turned to me, eyes shadowed. I did, and I meant it. But the past doesn't vanish because I wish it to. He reached out, touched my face lightly. Don't look at me like that. I'm still here. I'll always be here. His hand fell away, and he looked toward the horizon again. I wanted to believe him, but even the stars looked uneasy that night. The next morning I woke to voices downstairs, men's voices, low and tense. I slipped out of bed, heart pounding. Luca stood in the foyer with two strangers, both in dark suits. They looked like shadows carved from stone. When Luca saw me, he said softly, go back upstairs, it's nothing. But it didn't sound like nothing. One of the men's eyes flicked toward me, sharp, assessing. I felt the chill of it all the way through my bones. Luca stepped between us, his voice cool enough to cut. We'll talk outside. He led them out without another word. I stood there frozen until the sound of engines faded. Then I realized Emily was watching from the stairs. Is Daddy angry? She asked. I knelt down, forcing a smile. No, sweetheart, just busy. But my hands trembled when I reached for hers. That night he didn't come to bed. I found him in the study, staring at an old photograph I'd never seen before. A woman, dark haired, beautiful, holding a little boy with Luca's eyes. I sat down beside him quietly. Your mother? I asked. He nodded without looking at me. She died when I was 13. My father said the world only respects fear, and I believed him until I met you. His voice broke just slightly. Luca, I whispered. He closed the photo gently and said, I don't want Emily growing up with fear. I won't let it touch her. I rested my head against his shoulder. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Outside, the crickets sang, the sea whispered against the cliffs. But the peace we'd built felt thinner, now fragile. The next few weeks were a blur of calm and undercurrents. Luca worked longer hours, always taking calls in the garden where I couldn't hear. Emily started asking why he was gone so much. I kept saying he's busy, but even to my own ears, the words sounded hollow. One afternoon I drove into town with Emily for groceries. The streets were quiet, the sunlight bright on the cobblestones. When we came out of the bakery, a man leaned against a car watching us. He smiled, but it wasn't kind. Do I know you? I asked, my voice too tight. He shrugged. Maybe not, but I know him. The way he said it made my stomach twist. I took Emily's hand and walked fast back to the car, my heart racing. When we got home, Luca was already waiting outside. "Where were you?" he demanded, his tone sharp. I flinched. "The bakery," I said. "Just bread and milk." He rubbed a hand over his face. "Sorry, I didn't mean to snap. Did something happen?" "A man was watching us," I said. Describing him, Luca's jaw tightened. "Get inside," he said quietly. Now I did as he said. But as I turned, I caught the flicker of something in his eyes, something that looked like fear. That night, he didn't eat, he just stood at the window for hours. When I finally asked, "What's going on?" he said, "Someone testing me. Someone wants to see if I still care about the things they think make me weak." "You mean us?" I whispered. He nodded slowly. "They think love is weakness. They've never had it." That was the moment I realized how dangerous love could be in his world. But I also knew I wouldn't give it up, not for safety, not for peace. I reached for his hand and said, "Then we show them love is stronger." He looked at me long and hard, then smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why I need you." The next morning, the air felt different, heavy, as if the sky itself held its breath. Luca was already dressed in black shirt sleeves, rolled the look in his eyes hard, like stone. He kissed Emily's forehead, so gently. She didn't notice the tension in his hands. When she skipped away to play, I asked, "What are you going to do?" He said, "Handle it." But his voice was too calm. I followed him outside. "Please talk to me, Luca. If something happens, you'll take Emily to the coast." He interrupted, not looking back. "Marco will have boat ready." I grabbed his arm. "No, you're not doing this alone." He turned, then the edge in his expression softening. "But only for me. You're my only soft thing," he whispered. "That's why I can't risk it." The words cracked something inside me. But before I could answer, a black car came up the road, slow, deliberate. Luca pushed me back behind the stone column. "Stay." Inside, he said again, this time. It sounded like goodbye. The car stopped. 3 men stepped out, the same one from town, leading them, his smile lazy, dangerous. Luca moved forward, unarmed, his voice low. "And even I told you there's nothing left for you here." The man laughed. "You gave up your crown for a woman." The way he said woman made my blood go cold. Luca's jaw clenched. "Leave, she's not part of this." "But she's the reason you're weak," the man taunted. I couldn't help myself. I stepped out. Luca's head whipped toward me, eyes wide. "Get back inside." I shook my head. "Not without you." The man looked at me and said softly, "Brave, she's beautiful. Shame if she lost that bravery." Luca moved faster than I'd ever seen him. He caught the man's wrist, twisted, until I heard the crack. The others froze, tension snapping like glass. The moment hung sharp and breathless. Then one of Luca's men appeared from the grove, guns raised. No one moved, not even the wind. The man hissed, "Fine, we'll go. But this isn't over." Luca's voice was steel. "Maybe not, but next time it ends my way." They left in silence, dust curling in the wake of the car. Luca stood still for a long second, then turned to me, his eyes dark, with a mix of anger and relief. "I told you to stay inside," he said through clenched teeth. "You think I could stand there while they threatened you?" I shot back. He exhaled hard, dragged a hand through his hair, then pulled me into his arms so tight it almost hurt. "Don't ever scare me like that again," he muttered against my hair. I felt his heart pounding wild against my chest. I whispered, "You scared me first." He let out a rough laugh, then kissed my temple. The danger passed for now, but it left a shadow. The next days were filled with silence. Luca spent hours making calls, arranging something I didn't understand. One night, he finally said, "We're leaving tomorrow." "Where?" "Italy." I asked, confused. "We're already in Italy, further south, quieter, safer." "Maybe," I said softly. "Maybe, or maybe we just keep running." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "I'm not running, I'm choosing where to stand." He brushed my cheek and said, "You and Emily, you're my home. That's where I stand." The southern coast was nothing like the hills we left behind. It was wilder, the cliffs rough, and the waves louder, as if the sea wanted to drown every secret we carried. The villa there was smaller, tucked behind rows of lemon trees, sunlight spilling through open shutters. I unpacked slowly, listening to Emily hum upstairs. Luca moved through the rooms, restless like a lion in a cage. He finally stopped by the window, staring out at the horizon. I walked to him. "You hate it here, don't you?" He shook his head. "No, I hate what brought us here." I rested a hand on his arm, the muscles tight beneath my palm. "You did what you had to do." He turned then, his gaze softer, but full of questions. "Do you ever regret this, leaving your world for mine?" I thought of the city lights, the small apartment, the nights of loneliness. And then of him, of how he held Emily's hand, of how he said my name. "No," I whispered, "because this world has you." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if that hurt and healed him at the same time. The days settled into rhythm, mornings of sun and sea, afternoons of quiet. Luca taught Emily to swim. She clung to him, laughing as waves crashed around them. I watched from the shore, my heart too full. Sometimes he'd glance back at me, that small secret smile that said he knew I was watching. One evening, as the sun sank low, painting everything gold. Luca sat beside me on the sand for a long time. Neither of us spoke. Then he said, I used to think I was built from anger, that it was the only thing keeping me alive. But now when I look at her, when I look at you, I realize I was wrong. What keeps me alive is hope. I turned to him. You think you can really change? He met my eyes. I already have. Haven't you noticed? I smiled. But there was a tremor in it. I have. But I'm scared of losing it. You won't, he said. But there was something in his tone that didn't match the words. A shadow. 2 nights later, that shadow took shape. A letter arrived. No name, no address, just Luca written in careful ink. He read it once, then folded it slowly, his jaw tight. What is it? I asked. He slipped it into his pocket. Nothing. That can't wait. I didn't believe him. The silence between us stretched until it became something heavy. I said, Luca, please talk to me. He finally said, I thought leaving would end it, but they found a way to remind me who I was before I met you. I reached for his hand and said, then remind them who you are now. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw fear, real fear, not for himself, but for us. If anything happens to me, promise me you'll take her and go. His voice rough. I shook my head. No promises I can't keep. He almost smiled. That's why I love you, he said, because you never do what I ask. We stood there, the wind wrapping around us like a warning. The next morning I woke alone, Luca's side of the bed, cold. A note on the table. Don't look for me, trust me. I crumpled it in my hand, heart racing. Emily ran in, asking, where's Luca? I forced a smile. He'll be back soon, sweetheart. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure. I stared out at the sea, praying it would keep one more secret. The villa felt empty without him. Every sound seemed louder, the clock ticking, the wind moving through the lemon trees. Emily asked when he'd be back, and each time I said soon, even though the word tasted like a lie. By the 3rd day, I couldn't sit still anymore. Marco, one of Luca's men, was still guarding the gate. I went to him. Where is he? Marco looked away. Signora, you shouldn't, he said softly. Shouldn't? What? I demanded. Shouldn't know. I stepped closer, anger trembling in my voice. Tell me, he sighed, ran a hand through his hair. He went to Naples to meet someone from the old families. They wanted peace, a truce. My heart thudded. Naples was 3 hours away, and full of the same men who had already tried to hurt us. I'm going after him, I said. Marco shook his head. Luca would kill me if I let you. He won't if I find him first, I said, and walked away before he could stop me. The road wound along the coast, the sea flashing blue and silver beside me. The whole drive I kept hearing Luca's voice in my head, saying, don't look for me, trust me. But how could I trust silence when my heart screamed louder? By the time I reached Naples, the sun had dipped, low shadows stretching long. I parked near the docks, the smell of salt and oil thick in the air. Men stood in clusters, smoking, talking. I moved quietly, scanning faces, until I saw him, Luca, standing near a warehouse door, his back to me, his posture tense. 3 men faced him, their gestures sharp, angry. I stepped closer, hiding behind a stack of crates, their voices carried over the wind. One of the men said, you think love makes you clean, Luca? It makes you weak. Luca's reply was steady, maybe, but weakness makes me human. The man laughed. Human is for fools. You were born a king, Luca said quietly. Maybe. I don't want the throne anymore. My breath caught. I'd never heard him sound so calm, so certain. The man's smile faded. That's a dangerous wish, Luca, he nodded. Maybe. But I've lived through worse. And I've learned one thing, you can't threaten a man who's ready to lose everything. Then it happened. One of them moved too fast, a flash of metal. Luca turned, grabbing his wrist. They struggled. And for a moment, everything slowed. I didn't think, I just ran out, shouting, Luca. He turned just as the knife clattered to the ground. The man looked at me, eyes narrowing. So this is the reason, he said. He lunged. But Luca was faster. He slammed him back against the wall, his voice low and sharp. Touch her, and you die. The others stepped back, realizing it was over. Luca pushed the man away, breathing hard, then looked at me. What are you doing here? He demanded. I couldn't stay, I whispered. He stared at me for a long second, then laughed, breathless, half angry, half relieved. You're impossible, he said, and pulled me into his arms. Right there in the middle of the docks, the world spun around us, the sea wind cold and wild. I buried my face against his chest, whispering, don't you ever do that again. He said, I told you to trust me, I said, then stop giving me reasons not to. He kissed the top of my head, holding me like he never wanted to let go. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. I think it's over. They agreed to let me go, to let us go. I pulled back, searching his eyes. Is it really over? He smiled faintly. As much as anything ever ends in my world. But it's enough. We drove back before dawn, the sky pale with early light. Emily ran out when she saw the car, shouting his name. Luca lifted her high, spinning her until she squealed with joy. I stood watching them, the sunlight catching in their hair. And for the first time in months, I felt something like peace. Luca turned to me and said, maybe this time we get to stay. In her first-person voice written in one flowing line, clean, emotional, dangerous, and romantic, no paragraph breaks, just words breathing together. The weeks that followed felt like waking from a long, dark dream. The air on the coast was softer, and the sea seemed calmer, as if it knew our hearts finally could rest. Luca spent his mornings teaching Emily to read in Italian, their laughter spilling through open windows. I watched them from the kitchen, the smell of coffee and lemons filling the house. Sometimes I still caught myself waiting for the sound of danger, for the car that never came, but slowly I learned to trust the quiet. One afternoon, Luca called me out to the garden. He stood under the olive tree, holding something small in his hand, a ring, simple gold, warm in the sunlight. My breath caught. "What's this?" I asked. He smiled, that half smile that always made me weak. "It's a promise." He said, "Not a command, not a cage, just a promise that no matter what comes next, I'm yours. And you're mine." I felt tears sting my eyes. "Luca, you don't have." He shook his head. "I want to." I took the ring, my fingers trembling, and said, "Then I promise too." He slipped it onto my finger. And for a moment the world narrowed to just us, the wind, the sea, the soft sound of Emily laughing somewhere far away. He whispered, "I used to think love was a weakness. Now I know it's the only thing that makes me strong." I smiled, because for the first time I believed him. That night, we had dinner on the terrace, candles flickering, Luca telling stories about his mother, about the small bakery she once dreamed of owning. He said, "Maybe someday we'll open one too, a quiet life, fresh bread every morning, you baking, me eating." I laughed. "You eating most of it?" He grinned. "Maybe. But I'd still need you to taste test first." The warmth between us felt easy, natural, no shadows chasing it. Later, as we watched the stars, he said softly, "Do you ever think about what might have happened if we'd never met?" I turned to him. "I don't want to. I like this version of us." He reached for my hand, lacing his fingers with mine. "This version is my favorite too. And if the past ever tries to take it from me, I'll fight twice as hard." The days melted into summer, simple, sweet. One evening, Emily came running with a letter for me. It had no name, only an old family seal. My stomach tightened. Luca opened it, his eyes scanning the words, slowly. Then relaxing. "It's nothing," he said, "just business." But I saw the way his jaw set. Later that night I found him on the balcony, the letter still in his hand. "What aren't you telling me?" I asked. He looked at me for a long time, then said, "They want me back for one last favor, one last job." I shook my head. "No. You promised." He nodded. "I did. And I'll keep it this time. I'm not doing anything they ask. But saying no means war." I took his hand and said, "Then we face it together." He smiled faintly. "That's what scares me most. You're stronger than you think." I said, "Maybe," he whispered, "but only because of you." The next morning felt too quiet. Luca left early to meet someone in town, promising he'd be back before lunch. But hours passed, and the sun began to fall when his men started whispering outside. I knew something was wrong. I stepped out, my heart pounding. Marco looked up, his face pale. "There's been an ambush," he said. My world tilted. Where? I whispered. He hesitated, then said, "Near the old harbor." He went alone. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, ignoring Marco's protest, and drove the coastal road fast, the waves crashing below like thunder. When I reached the harbor, it was chaos. 2 cars wrecked, smoke curling into the evening air. I ran, calling his name, "Luca, Luca." Then I saw him leaning against a crate, blood on his shirt, but still standing, still breathing. I ran to him, tears already burning my eyes. "What happened?" He managed a smile, just a reminder from the past that it doesn't like to be forgotten. I pressed my hand against his wound. Trembling, "You need a hospital." He caught my wrist. "No, no hospitals, they'll find us." I looked at him, furious and scared all at once. "Luca, this isn't strength. This is madness." He touched my cheek, even hurt. He still looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered. "You once said love makes us do stupid things," he murmured. "I guess this is mine." I shook my head, crying, "Don't you dare die on me." He laughed softly. "Never for you, never for us." Marco arrived minutes later and helped me get him into the car. We drove fast, the night swallowing us whole. Back at the villa, I cleaned his wound, my hands shaking. He watched me, silent, then said, "You shouldn't have come. You should have stayed safe." I met his eyes and said, "How could I, when my heart was bleeding somewhere on a dock?" "You don't get to be the only hero here, Luca. I get to save you too." His expression softened, and for a second all the pain disappeared, replaced by something tender, almost fragile. He whispered, "Remind me to never argue with you again." I smiled through tears. "I'll remind you every day, as long as you stay to hear it." The next days blurred together. He healed slowly, stubbornly. Emily drew pictures of him with bandages, calling him her brave lion. Luca would laugh, wince, then hold her close at night. He'd pull me into his arms, whispering, "I'm sorry I brought danger to your door." And I'd whisper back, "You also brought love. You can't have one without the other." One evening, when the sky burned orange, He said, I think it's time to disappear, really disappear, new names, new country. I stared at him. Is that what you want? He looked past me toward the horizon. What I want is to wake up every day and not wonder if someone's coming for us. I want you free. I want Emily to have a childhood, not a hiding place. I touched his face and said then, let's go anywhere as long as it's with you. He smiled, tired, but full of hope. Maybe Italy, maybe a small town where nobody knows my name. I said, maybe a bakery. He laughed, yeah, a bakery. And no guns. I nodded, no guns, just flour, sugar, and peace. After weeks of planning, we finally left New York behind, a single suitcase each, and a promise that this time we would live, not hide. Luca drove through the night, his hand never leaving mine. Emily slept in the backseat, her small head against a pillow of stars. By dawn, we reached the airport under different names. The tickets said Florence. But to me, it felt like freedom. When the plane lifted into the clouds, I felt tears sting my eyes. Luca looked at me and smiled, tired but real. We made it, he said, and I whispered, not yet, but soon. Italy welcomed us with golden light and the smell of rain on old stone streets. We found a quiet village near the sea, a bakery for sale, just like he dreamed. We bought it with cash. Encouraged the first morning there, he kissed my forehead and said, ready to start over. I nodded, watching him tie an apron around his waist, my Mafia king turning into a baker. I couldn't help laughing. You look dangerous with flour on your face. He grinned, then said, don't tell anyone, they'll ruin my reputation. The days fell into gentle rhythm, bread rising in the oven, Emily running between the tables, laughter instead of gunfire. Every night Luca would lock the door, turn the sign to closed, and whisper, finally, home. I thought maybe fate had changed its mind. But peace is fragile. One afternoon, car I didn't recognize stopped outside the bakery. Two men stepped out, suits, dark faces familiar with danger. I froze. Luca came from the back, his eyes flicking to mine. Stay with Emily, he murmured, then walked the door. I watched from behind the counter, heart pounding. They talked quietly, too quiet to hear. Then one of the men handed him an envelope. Luca took it, opened it, read, then looked up, cold fury flickering across his face. He closed the door behind them and turned to me. It's nothing, he said, but his voice was too steady, too calm. Luca, I said softly. What was in the letter? He didn't answer, just pulled me close and whispered, I thought we left it all behind. Maybe we never do. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, the moonlight silver on his face. I walked to him, wrapped a blanket around his shoulders, and said, whatever it is, we'll face it together. He looked at me for a long time and said, you shouldn't have to face anything anymore. You've done enough. I shook my head. Love isn't about enough, it's about forever. He smiled, then kissed my forehead and whispered, then, forever it is. The next morning, the air felt heavier, like the sky itself was waiting for something. Luca tried to smile while he kneaded dough, but I could see the worry hiding in his eyes. Emily hummed at the table, drawing hearts on napkins. I wanted to believe everything was normal, but normal had never belonged to us. When the bell over the bakery door rang, I looked up and froze. A woman stood there, tall, elegant eyes too sharp to belong to a customer. Luca went still, flour on his hands, his voice low. Francesca, what are you doing here? She smiled thinly. I came to remind you who you are, he said quietly. I know exactly who I am. She stepped closer. No, you don't. You're pretending to be something you're not. The families want you back, Luca. You owe them. Luca's jaw tightened. I owe them nothing. Francesca's gaze flicked to me, then softened, almost pitying. She said, she doesn't know, does she? I stepped forward. Enough, I said. Whatever you want, say it to me. Francesca laughed, softly. Brave, I see why he likes you. Then she looked back at Luca, her voice turning cold. They won't stop until you come back, or until there's nothing left for you to love. She walked out, leaving silence behind. Luca's fists clenched white against the counter. He turned to me. I didn't want you to hear that, I said, too late. He met my eyes, fury mixing with fear. I won't let them near you, I swear it. That night, he barely spoke, just paced the kitchen, checking the locks twice. When I tried to touch him, he pulled me close too tightly, whispering, they can't take you from me, they can't. I whispered back, they won't, Luca, I trust you. But inside I could feel the old fear waking again. Days passed. We pretended everything was fine. Customers laughed. Emily learned to shape roles into stars. But every evening, Luca watched the road, his shoulders tense. One evening he disappeared outside. I followed him, the sunset painting gold on the sea. I found him near the water, phone to his ear, his voice sharp, you tell them if they touch her, or the girl, I'll burn every bridge left between us. He ended the call, turned, saw me, his face softening instantly. You shouldn't be out here, he said. I walked closer, hearing the waves crash behind us. I'm not leaving you, Luca, no matter what. He reached for me, his voice rough. You should have been my peace, not my punishment. I said, maybe I'm both. And he laughed, then pulled me into his arms and whispered, if loving you means fighting the whole world, then So be it. The storm came at midnight, thunder rolling over the hills, the air thick with the smell of rain. Luke awoke before the first knock even sounded. He moved fast, quiet, his eyes already dark. With knowing eye held Emily close as the door rattled under another hit. Luca turned to me, his voice low. Take her to the cellar and don't come out until I say. I shook my head no. He said my name softly, please, for once just do as I ask. I wanted to argue, but the fear in his eyes stopped me. I grabbed Emily and led her down the narrow stairs, the old stone walls cold around us. Above I heard muffled voices. Then the sound of something breaking. Emily buried her face against my shoulder. I whispered, it's okay, sweetheart, Daddy. Just talking, but my heart was pounding. After what felt like forever, the noise stopped. Silence so heavy it rang in my ears. I told Emily to stay, then crept up the stairs. The front door hung open, rain blowing. Inside, Luca stood in the doorway, his shirt torn, his knuckles bleeding. Two men lay on the ground outside, not dead, just broken enough to send a message. When he saw me, he exhaled like he'd been holding his breath forever. They won't bother us again, he said. I walked to him, tears mixing with rain. Why does it always have to end like this? He touched my cheek. Because I was born in a world that doesn't know peace, but I'm trying for you, for her, I whispered. Then let me try with you. His hand slid to my neck, his forehead resting against mine. You shouldn't love me like this, it's dangerous. I smiled through the tears. Maybe I was made for dangerous things like you, he laughed softly, then kissed my hair, whispering, you make me believe I deserve tomorrow. That night we didn't sleep. We just held each other, listening to the sea crash against the rocks. By morning, the sky had cleared, sunlight spilling over the hills. Luca stood at the window watching the horizon, then turned to me, his eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. I made a decision. He said, we're leaving for good. I asked, where? He smiled, anywhere. The past can't find us. We left before dawn, the world still asleep, the road winding through olive trees, silver with morning mist. Luca drove, with one hand on the wheel, the other holding mine, his thumb tracing small circles that said everything words couldn't. Emily slept in the back, her teddy bear tucked beneath her chin. As we crossed the border, the sky began to glow pale gold. He glanced at me and smiled, a real one, no fear behind it. This is it, he said, our clean start. I smiled back. It feels like forever, he nodded. Maybe forever starts here. We found a small town by the sea where the air smelled of oranges and salt. We rented a house with white shutters and a view of the waves. Luca started baking again. The locals called him Signor Dolce because he always slipped extra pastries to children. Emily made friends, learned Italian faster than I ever could. Sometimes I'd watch them both from the balcony, the man who once ruled shadows, now laughing in the sunlight, the little girl who taught him how to love again. And I'd think maybe we were always meant to find each other. One evening, as the sun melted into the sea, Luca brought me outside, the sky pink and gold. He handed me a small wooden box. Inside was a necklace, a tiny gold heart with our initials carved inside. I gasped. Luca, it's beautiful, he smiled. It's not gold that matters, it's what it means. I took it from the box, my fingers trembling. What does it mean? He looked at me, eyes shining with quiet love. It means you're my peace, my beginning, and my home. I felt tears fill my eyes and said, then don't you ever lose your home? He laughed softly. Never again. We stood there watching the last light fade, the sea whispering against the shore. He said softly, you know, I used to think power was everything. Now I know it was just noise. I asked, and what's everything now? He looked at me and said, you and Emily, the sound of your laughter in the morning, the smell of bread, the silence that feels like safety. I reached up, touched his face, and whispered, then promise me this lasts. He kissed my hand and said, forever, and this time I believed him. As the stars rose above us and the wind carried the scent of the sea, I realized love wasn't something that saved you, it was something that taught you how to live again.